May 14, 1998, Beverly Hills, 10:15 p.m. Frank Sinatra is dying, and his children are 5 minutes away, watching Seinfeld. While old Blue Eyes draws his final breath alone in a hospital bed, Nancy Sinatra sits in her living room, laughing at Jerry and Kramer's antics. She has no idea her father's heart is stopping just down the road. And when she finally discovers the truth, it becomes her greatest sadness, a regret so crushing that 25 years later, she still can't forgive herself. But that tragic night, it was just the final chapter in a family torn apart by one man's deepest secret. A secret so dark that Frank Sinatra spent his entire life running from it, drinking himself unconscious to escape it and terrorizing everyone around him because of it. Today, we're diving into the real Frank Sinatra, not the smooth crooner or the Rat Pack legend, but the broken man behind the velvet curtain. His own children have finally pulled back that curtain, and what they've revealed is shocking. We're talking about deathbed confessions, violent rages fueled by Jack Daniels, and a family secret so devastating that it shaped every relationship he ever had. This isn't the sanitized version you've heard before. This is the story Frank's daughters Nancy and Tina never wanted to tell, until now. Let me paint you a picture of Frank Sinatra's final moments. Picture a man who commanded stages around the world, who made presidents nervous and mobsters respect him, lying helpless in a hospital bed. And what's he thinking about? Not his legendary career, not his billions of records sold. He's thinking about one decision he made 48 years earlier, and he can't stop apologizing for it. Tina Sinatra arrives at the hospital too late. Her father is already gone, but in his final days, she witnessed something that shattered her understanding of the man she thought she knew. Frank Sinatra, the guy who sang My Way and bragged about having too few regrets to mention, was actually drowning in one massive regret. Here's what Tina revealed. Her father spent his last days consumed by guilt over leaving his first wife, Nancy Barbato, for Ava Gardner back in 1950. He kept apologizing over and over for breaking up their family. This wasn't some passing moment of reflection. This was a man being tortured by a decision he made half a century ago. But wait, it gets worse. Nancy Sinatra, his eldest daughter, confirmed this in a CBS interview that sent shockwaves through the Sinatra legacy. She asked him directly, "If you had it to do all over again, would you leave Mom for Ava?" His answer? A simple, devastating no. Think about that. Frank Sinatra, one of the most famous men who ever lived, admitted that the defining choice of his life was wrong. The passionate affair that inspired some of his greatest music. He wished it never happened. But Frank's regret wasn't just emotional torture. It was rocket fuel for a personality so volatile that his own family lived in fear. Nancy called him Jekyll and Hyde, and she wasn't being dramatic. When the gin bottle came out, even his wives would literally lock themselves in their rooms. Here's a scene that'll chill you. Frank at his Palm Springs home, Jack Daniels' flag flying outside to signal cocktail hour. He's already 6 double whiskeys deep when dinner arrives. His fourth wife, Barbara, watches nervously as his mood shifts. One wrong word, one sideways glance, and the chairman of the board becomes a monster. His daughter Tina remembers walking into toy stores with him as a child, watching this beautiful moment where he'd quietly buy dolls for crying children whose mothers couldn't afford them. Pure generosity, pure kindness. But hours later, that same man might be smashing television sets in a rage, or getting into fistfights with journalists who dared to photograph his bad side. The scars from his traumatic birth, forceps that left permanent marks on his face, and a punctured eardrum made him paranoid about being photographed from the left. But it was the deeper scars, the ones from growing up as a latchkey kid in Hoboken, that really broke him. Picture young Frank, wandering the docks alone while his parents worked multiple jobs. His mother Dolly was a political powerhouse, his father Marty was always at work, and Frank was just a solitary kid staring across the river at Manhattan, dreaming of escape, but learning that love meant abandonment. That little boy never left. He just grew up to become a man who surrounded himself with entourages and Rat Pack members because he was terrified of being alone. But the loneliness always won. By his later years, he was drinking a bottle of Jack Daniels a day just to sleep, because the nights reminded him too much of those empty childhood hours. Now here's where this story gets really twisted. Frank's children didn't just inherit his talent, they inherited his war. And the battlefield? The truth about who their father really was. Nancy Sinatra wrote the authorized biography in 1985. It's protective, sentimental. She calls him Daddy throughout and portrays him as a flawed but ultimately heroic figure. Nancy became the guardian of the legend, the defender of the estate. But Tina wrote what she called a cathartic memoir in 2000 that exposed everything Nancy tried to hide. She called her father restless, lonely, and conflicted. She revealed his mob connections, his manipulative fourth wife, and most shocking of all, the year-long silence between her and Frank that she would regret for the rest of her life. Here's what happened. Frank's final wife, Barbara Marx, had become what Tina called manipulative, driving wedges between Frank and his children. The conflict got so bad that Tina stopped speaking to her father for an entire year of Frank Sinatra's life, a man who was already haunted by regret, lost to family drama. And then came that night, in May 1998. Barbara was there when Frank died, sitting in a chair beside his hospital bed, but his children. Nancy was at home watching TV. Tina was driving frantically through Beverly Hills traffic. Frank Jr. was nowhere to be found. The man who spent his entire life terrified of being alone died exactly the way he feared most, without the people he loved most beside him. When Tina finally arrived, she found Barbara in that chair and her father already gone. The image haunted her. The woman who had kept them away, sitting vigil over the body of the man they'd been estranged from. But here's the secret that ties everything together, the one that Nancy and Tina's conflicting stories actually reveal when you read between the lines. Frank Sinatra's deepest secret wasn't about the mob. It wasn't about his affairs or his drinking or his violent temper. His deepest secret was that behind all that swagger, all that confidence, all that I did it my way bravado, was a little boy who never stopped being afraid. He was afraid of being abandoned, so he surrounded himself with people, but pushed away the ones who mattered most. He was afraid of being ordinary, so he became extraordinary, but could never enjoy it. He was afraid of being vulnerable, so he built walls of alcohol and rage that kept even his own children at a distance. The tragedy is that Frank spent his whole life running from the very thing he created: loneliness. Every decision he made, leaving Nancy Sr., drinking himself unconscious, surrounding himself with yes men, was designed to escape the scared kid from Hoboken. But that kid was always there, waiting in the quiet moments, in the early morning hours when the Jack Daniels wore off and the emptiness crept back in. His daughter Nancy preserved the legend because she understood that her father needed to be remembered as strong. But Tina told the truth because she understood that her father needed to be forgiven for being human. And maybe that's the most beautiful thing about this story. Both daughters were right. Frank Sinatra was both the chairman of the board and the lonely little boy. He was both the generous saint who paid strangers' medical bills and the terrifying drunk who smashed furniture in fits of rage. Frank Sinatra once toasted, "May you live to be 100, and the last voice you hear be mine." In a way, his children granted that wish. Through their conflicting but loving testimonies, we still hear Frank's voice, not just the polished baritone from the records, but the raw, honest voice of a man who was simultaneously the strongest and most fragile person in any room. His regret about leaving Nancy Sr. wasn't just about one decision. It was about a pattern of choosing immediate gratification over lasting love, choosing the spotlight over the shadows, choosing to be Frank Sinatra instead of just Frank. But here's what makes this story ultimately hopeful. His children forgave him. Nancy protected his legacy not despite his flaws, but because of them. Tina exposed his darkness not to destroy him, but to understand him. They both loved the whole man, the genius and the wreck, the chairman and the latchkey kid. The last voice we hear isn't just Frank Sinatra's, it's the chorus of his children, singing his story in perfect, heartbreaking harmony. What part of Frank's story hit you the hardest? The deathbed regrets, the family war, or the realization that even our heroes are just scared kids in expensive suits? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the real people behind the legends.